Under Washington State Implied Contest Law, by driving Washington State, you imply consent. Chemical for alcohol drugs. Under Washington State Implied Consent Law, by the operating of motor vehicles in Washington State, you have implicitly consented in being tested for alcohol and drugs upon request of law enforcement officer. Alcohol, drugs, and law, the Shape to Drive Washington Driver Guide. Obtain an instruction permit. You must be at least blank years old or older, enrolled in approval driver training course. Must be 15 and a half. To obtain an instruction permit, you must be at least 15 years old and enrolled in an approved driver training course. You'll be 15 and a half, 15 years old. You're eligible for Washington State Intermediate Driver License. You have committed any traffic violation within 6 months. You are eligible for Washington State Intermediate Driver's License. You have committed or even been charged with any violation within 6 months. Getting your license, watch the driver guide. If a 16-year-old driver convicted of a possession of alcohol, her license revoked for 1 year, 3 months. 16-year-old driver's license convicted in possession of alcohol, his or her license will be revoked for 1 year. If you're convicted of a DUI, the passenger under age 16 was your vehicle at the time of offense, your jail sentence will be increased. Child Protective Services would be notified. Ignition interlock device, the IID installation period will be increased. All of the above. Your AID and also your AID, which has the interlock systems, which is stops you for your BAC. Anything under age 18 is 0.02. Anything adult is 0.08. The term used in Washington State means operating a vehicle while under the influence of alcohol and drugs. Driving under influence of intoxication is a DUI. Operating vehicle impaired is OVI. Driving intoxication DWI. Driving under influence is a DUI. BDUI. Washington State uses the test driving under influence of DUI means operating the vehicle while under the influence of alcohol and drugs. Some other states use some terms of driving while intoxicated, DWI, operating a vehicle impaired, OV1, even driving under influence of intoxication, DUI. While you hold and search for in driving, you supervise someone sitting next to you, holds a valid driver's license, has at least 5 years licensed driving experience, meets all above requirements. While the Washington State instruction permit, you're driving and must be supervised whether you drive. Supervising passengers, licensed driver, at least 5 years licensed driver experience. He must seated right for the passenger seat instruction permit. If you're convicted of driving under the influence of alcohol, DUI, you'll face which of the following penalties? Jail, a fine, a license suspension, all of above. If you're under the age of a parent guardian, you must sign a pioneer authorized affidavit before you may obtain a structure permit. If you're under the age of 18, your parent guardian must sign a pioneer authorized affidavit before you obtain structure permit and to accompany and driver license office submit affidavit. Yeah, I'm going to do my new license. I got a license. I got a thing for my CDL A and B hazmat, and I'm doing my specification for maximum Washington state line court rules and regulations on affidavit and processing, prosecuting recommendations on processing, and the alpha plea. Alpha plea contributes with bear arms, the Second Amendment to bear arms. This is the limitation fines, limitation limits on fines, statutes, and limitations. If a driver age 13 through 17 is convicted of possession of alcohol, drug offense, a firearm related offense, her license will be revoked at least 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, 4 years. A driver age 13 is convicted of possession of alcohol, drug offense, firearms related offense, his or her license will be revoked at least for the second offense 2 years. 2 years. A driver 13 through 17 is convicted of possession of alcohol, drug offense, or firearm related offense, his or her license revoked for at least 2 years for the second offense. The driver 13 to 17 convicted of possession of alcohol, drug offense, firearm related offenses, and of her second such offense, his or her license will be revoked 2 years until they turn 18 years old. If you're found guilty of parking in a space that is reserved for persons disabled parking privilege that don't have such privilege, you will be fined $250. If you're found guilty in parking illegal in the space that is reserved for persons with disabled parking privilege, you'll be fined $250. The maximum fine parking infraction in Washington State is $250. Disabled parking sign, traffic signs, and Washington Driver's Guide, RCW.63.110. A 19-year-old driver convicted of her first drug offense, and her license will be revoked for blank for the offense. The 19-year-old driver is convicted of his or her first drug offense. Her license will be revoked for the first offense. 19-year-old driver is convicted of her first drug offense, and her license will be revoked for 1 year. A person age 13 to 20 is convicted of his or her drug offense. His or her license is revoked for 1 year until he or she turns 17 years old. Whichever is longer, juvenile alcohol, drug, firearm violations, and shape and drive Washington Driver Guide. Minor in possession, Washington State Department license. 14-year-old driver convicted of possession of alcohol. His or her license will be revoked for a first offense. 14-year-old driver convicted of possession of alcohol. Will will be revoked until she is 17. 14-year-old driver convicted of possession of alcohol. She will be revoked until she turns 17 years old. 14 driver is convicted of possession of alcohol. Her license revoked. 14-year-old driver convicted of possession of alcohol license will be revoked until she turns 17. She's only 14 years old. Her first conviction of possession of alcohol and her license will be revoked until she turns 17. A person aged 13 to 17 convicted of possession of alcohol of any of the involved firearms and also his or her first such offenses, licenses were revoked 1 year until she turns 17. Intermediate license holder. Intermediate license holder, blank, department license send warning letters to do the parent guardian. The fault in an accident, violates an intermediate license restriction, commits a traffic violation. Any of these situations above apply. An intermediate license holder alternate drinking and driving includes riding designated driver, taking a taxi, using public transportation, all of above. Alternatives of drinking and driving include taking taxis, using public transportation, riding with a designated driver. What do you walking and walking under the influence of alcohol actually increases the pedestrian's risk of being involved in an accident. For this reason, if the Washington State law enforcement officer observes to safe place you are arrested and found to be driving with blood alcohol content, BAC of. Now you are arrested and you are found driving. Alcohol content BAC of 0.08. If you get traffic tickets while driving in Idaho, your vehicle is impounded until you answer the citation. You will receive an additional citation from Washington State. You may return to Washington State and answer the citation. You may have to post bail until you answer the citation. You may return to Washington State and answer the citation. It takes an average person body about 1 hour to process alcohol and alcoholic drink, or 2 hours, or 3 hours, or 4 hours. Your liver takes 1 hour to process all and filter all your THC is the main psychoactive ingredient in marijuana. Washington state drivers at least 21 years old can be arrested for driving with THC level of nanograms per milliliter of blood or higher. The driver also holds an intermediate driver license, violates one of the restrictions. All the restrictions will be extended until he or she turns 18, 17, 21, 20. The driver holds an intermediate driver license, violates its restrictions. All restrictions will be extended until he, she turns. Driver holds intermediate driver license, violates one of the restrictions. All restrictions will be extended until he or she turns 18, 20, 17, 21. The driver who holds intermediate driver license violates its restrictions. All restrictions will be extended until he or she turns. Driver holds intermediate driver's license, violates restrictions. On restrictions will be extended until he or she turns. The driver will hold intermediate driver license, violate those restrictions, and all restrictions will be extended until she or he turns 18. Normally, the driver who holds the intermediate driver license may not transport or unload passengers under the age of 20.
As a Marine, James Mattis was always combat ready, and as President Trump's first Secretary of Defense, he was front and center in many policy debates. This morning, in his first television interview since his resignation, Mattis reflects on his 68 eventful years with our David Martin.
James Mattis served more than 40 years in the Marines, much of it commanding troops in battle, but he almost didn't make it to boot camp.
I fell onto the ice and I was on my way, coming down that ridgeline much faster than I ever anticipated.
It was the dead of winter, 1971, and he very nearly fell to his death from that ridge outside his hometown of Richland, Washington.
The next thing I knew, I woke up and there was blood all over the ice.
America's enemies almost caught an early break.
Well, yeah, but I assure you that I was a pretty average Marine. There were a lot of other Marines who could have taken my place and done just as well as me.
So he's now retired from the Marines and no longer Donald Trump's defense secretary. He's back where he grew up, a stone's throw from the Columbia River.
The river was a big part of our lives. Not a day in the summer went by we wouldn't be in the river swimming in it.
What else did you do?
We'd go hunting in the fall. We'd go camping in the summer. This is heaven on earth.
And were you just free to roam as a kid?
Very much so. Very much. I started hitchhiking when I was about 13 and just kept right on going.
And ended up in jail more than once.
I've been in a few scrapes along the way.
What kind of scrapes?
Partying too much one night underage in college and spent some time in jail. And also gotten a few too many fights along the way when I was out hitchhiking around the American West.
So you got into the Marine Corps with a police record?
Yes, I did.
Along with fellow Marine Bing West, he's written an autobiography called Call Sign Chaos. That stands for Colonel has another outstanding suggestion. The staff's wry response to his frequent brainstorms.
As in, oh my God, what's he going to think of next?
That's probably a pretty apt description of how they looked at the chaos I brought.
That chaos was inflicted on the enemy beginning with the Iraqi army in the first Gulf War, which is where I first met him.
Have you been in combat?
No, I have not.
You worry about how you're going to react?
No, I have the easiest job in the battalion, commanding the men. I have no doubt about them, and they'll carry me right along. No doubt at all.
You weren't about to admit to me that you had any doubts on the eve of battle, did you?
We got the word that we were going to lose hundreds, killed and wounded.
Mattis was taking a force of 1,200 men into the teeth of Iraqi minefields and artillery.
I remember thinking at the time that this lieutenant colonel, nobody's ever heard of, he's got to decide which of these Marines go first.
That's the tough part, deciding who's gonna lead the assaults.
How do you steel yourself to make those life and death decisions?
I made it clear that no commander would report to me their casualties unless they could no longer continue to fight. I'd grieve later.
In 4 days of fighting, Mattis didn't lose a single Marine, and his men rolled into Kuwait City, cheered as liberators. Victory would never again come so easily.
There's a million things, right or wrong, and we'll see how many come out on our side.
After 9/11, he led a force of 4,000 Marines into southern Afghanistan, setting up an outpost called WYMAN. It was the deepest air assault ever conducted by the Marines. But Mattis wanted to go deeper.
We were restricted by higher headquarters. We were limited in what offensive operations we could do.
Is that frustrating?
I couldn't understand the timidity and why it was taking so long.
Where was Osama bin Laden when you were at Rhino?
Osama bin Laden was still in Afghanistan.
Bin Laden was 400 miles away in the Tora Bora Mountains. Mattis had the helicopters to get there.
We would basically block the escape routes, and then we would move up the two valleys. We were very confident that we had a good fix on him. And as we pushed up those valleys, he would have to move, and at that point we'd kill him.
It was the Bush administration's best chance to get America's worst enemy. But the order never came. We in the military missed the opportunity, Mattis writes.
You willing to say now that you could have gotten them?
You can never give that kind of certainty, but he'd have had a hell of a time getting out if we got those troops in.
Mattis left Afghanistan to take command of a Marine division in a mission he never saw coming, the invasion of Iraq.
I was somewhat flabbergasted. I didn't think Saddam could do much in terms of threatening us. There was a problem there, but I thought it could be solved other than us invading them.
Mattis's co-author, Bing West, shot this video as the Marines rumbled toward Baghdad.
Speed. We had to move quickly. Any enemy, given enough time, can adapt to a circumstance. If you don't keep the tempo up, then they can dig in their heels, and then you start paying more of the price.
His Marines famously toppled the statue of Saddam Hussein, but 9 months later found themselves engulfed by an insurgency. Move it, hurry!
The enemy was rising everywhere. The tribes got furious. Anyone reading a history book knows what's going to happen at this point. There's going to be violence, and we didn't have enough troops to contain it.
Mattis was in the thick of it. 29 gunners, drivers, radio operators, and aides who moved with him around the battlefield.
And 17 of those 29 lads would be killed or wounded over the next 4 months, to give you an idea of just how bad it was. And I'm a general. I'm not the toughest fighter.
The toughest fighting was in the terrorist stronghold of Fallujah, which Mattis was ordered to liberate. He thought it was a mistake to use so much firepower in a city of 300,000.
So you went in to Fallujah, what, against your better judgment?
You've got to do it. I mean, that's why they're called orders. They're not called likes. You don't have to like it. You were ordered to do it.
In the midst of the battle, the images of urban combat became too much for the Bush administration. Mattis was ordered to call it off.
I could not fathom why we'd been ordered to attack and where we were in the first place, or why we would stop deep inside the city and then pull back.
The impact of such incoherence, Mattis writes, cannot be overstated. Dizzying is the appropriate word.
How does it feel to be told, oh, never mind?
You've got to have confidence what you're doing is right. And if it's right to break the back of the terrorists, then do it. Just do it. Do it as well as you can. Protect the innocent to the degree you can. But don't get wobbly when the going gets tough.
And the Bush administration got wobbly.
Yes.
With Fallujah still in enemy hands, Mattis went into the city to confront face-to-face one of the sheikhs who backed the terrorists.
I simply made certain my carbine was laying across my lap, and I just reached down and I thumbed it over onto burst fire so that he'd hear it. He said, "Do I look like a terrorist?" And I leaned forward at him and I looked at him. Well, yes, as a matter of fact, you do.
Exploits like that earned Mattis a nickname, Mad Dog.
It's not one that I've ever grown fond of, no matter how many times it's used.
Why not?
It has the idea incorporated into it of just someone who's thoughtless, someone who's simply abrasive or aggressive for aggressive's sake. This is decisive battles.
His aggressiveness is informed by a personal library that once contained 7,000 books.
Are those 7,000 books you read?
I'll bet I read about 90% of them. I wouldn't claim I read all of them, but by and large, yeah, I don't get a book unless I'm going to read it.
And underline, as he did with the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher.
I would carry copies of this in my rucksack when I was overseas, because if something wasn't going well, you pull that out and say, don't feel sorry for yourself. You're not a victim. You choose the kind of way you're going to react to this.
For all his reading, Mattis can sometimes sound trigger happy. In 2005, he told an audience, "It's a lot of fun to fight. It's fun to shoot some people. I like brawling."
It came across to most of the country as sounding a little bloodthirsty.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm not tormented by saying we'll stand up for freedom.
I remember running into you while you were still dealing with the aftermath of that.
Yes.
And you said, it's only pressure if you feel it.
Yeah. Marcus Aurelius.
When have you felt pressure?
I put pressure on myself, but I don't feel pressure from others.
When we come back, how the man called Chaos handled pressure from two very different presidents and was fired by both of them.
To be combat ready on the battlefield is one thing. To deal with the challenges of Washington is another. David Mark continues his conversation with former Secretary of Defense James Mattis.
Before James Mattis parted ways with President Trump, he was ousted by President Obama.
How did it end with you and the Obama administration?
Well, it ended with me leaving office early.
Mattis was a four-star general in command of all U.S. forces in the Middle East.
You were relieved of command.
I was detached early and replaced early.
So the president essentially had lost confidence in you.
I believe so. I won't speak for the president.
According to Leon Panetta, who was Secretary of Defense at the time, the Obama White House regarded Mattis as too eager for a military confrontation with Iran.
Iran had been caught plotting to assassinate Saudi Arabia's ambassador to the U.S. by blowing up this popular Georgetown restaurant. As far as Mattis was concerned, Iran had intended to commit an act of war, what would have been the worst terrorist attack on American soil since 9/11.
They're going to do it with a bomb. And so you can imagine what it would have been, what the carnage would have looked like.
I believe we had to respond forcefully, Mattis writes in his book, Call Sign Chaos. My military options would raise the cost for this attack beyond anything Iran's leaders could bear. But the Obama administration treated it simply as a crime, arresting a low-level courier and sending him to prison for 25 years. My traction inside the White House was eroding, Mattis writes. The White House was wary of my command and increasingly distrusted me. In December of 2012, he was forced into retirement.
Do you think your government service was done?
Oh, I was quite certain it was done.
But the surprise election of Donald Trump changed all that. The president-elect met Mattis only once.
All I can say is he is the real deal.
But that was enough.
I'm proud to formally announce today my intention to nominate General James as the next Secretary.
Did you intend to serve the full 4 years?
Of course.
You only made it halfway?
Well, that's fair. But there comes a time when you have to look at it and say, are you aligned with the person you're working with?
This is his first television interview about his resignation.
You resigned the day after the president announced that the U.S. was putting all its troops out in Syria.
Yes.
Did that decision have anything to do with your...
Absolutely it did.
But what about the decision to withdraw from Syria?
I disagree with it.
Because
we need to maintain enough influence there that we don't see the same thing that happened when we withdrew from Iraq.
Mattis believed a sudden pullout would undermine the campaign against ISIS and betray allies who were fighting alongside the Americans. In his resignation letter, he wrote, "My views on treating allies with respect are strongly held."
This was how I saw the strength of America, that we keep our alliances together and keep them tight. And if I wasn't the right person to do this, then the president needed someone more aligned with his views.
this is a blunt letter.
I was honest and forthright with him about where it was that I was parting ways.
Mattis had planned to stay on for 2 months, but the president decided to replace him immediately. He twisted the knife by tweeting, "When President Obama ingloriously fired Jim Mattis, I gave him a second chance."
Have you ever talked to the president since?
No,
That was your last conversation.
it was.
As for other differences Mattis had with the president,
I will not speak ill of a sitting president. I'm not going to do it.
but he will say this.
He's an unusual president, our president is. And I think that especially with the just the rabid nature of politics today. We've got to be careful. We could tear this country apart.
For about $20, you can buy a Mattis for President t-shirt, or Mad Dog if you prefer.
Hey, how's it going? See you. You still look like Santa Claus.
Ho, ho, ho! The way he works a local bar
And you're looking good.
is as smooth as any politician.
This is my favorite place to come to see friends, you know?
Well, you got a lot of them here.
This bar was where he used a fake ID to buy his first underage drink.
Back where I belong, you know?
He's not campaigning, but the topic comes up. When you get ready to run, I'll help you.
We got more people asking you to do it. No, I don't. It'd be like 5-year jail cell.
So, for now, Mattis is teaching at Stanford and serving on the boards of corporations, and repeating to himself one of the lessons all his reading of history taught him.
You just have a role to play for a little while. So play it well, but don't let it go to your head.
Defense Secretary General James Mattis is in Studio 57 for his first live interview since resigning from the Trump administration. His new book is titled Call Sign Chaos, Learning to Lead. In it, General Mattis writes, "I did as well as I could for as long as I could. When my concrete solutions and strategic advice, especially keeping faith with our allies, no longer resonated, it was time to resign." General Mattis served as Secretary of Defense for nearly 2 years. During his long career in the Marine Corps before his service as Defense Secretary, he held key roles leading troops involved in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. General, good morning. It's good to see you. You served almost 2 years. I know you expected to serve 4. How's this unexpected summer going?
It's going wonderfully west of the Rockies. I am enjoying life.
Thing I don't want to miss Washington.
I miss the people in Washington. I don't miss any of the issues, Anthony. Not one bit.
You told our David Martin that the pullout from Syria, announced pullout by President Trump of troops from Syria, weighed heavily in your decision to resign. How did you know that it was time? Not only, well, actually, that issue has reversed itself. Troops are now remaining in Syria. So I'm curious, do you wish you could reverse yourself and go back?
No, I make decisions. I don't have regrets about them. I've always believed strongly that America needs allies. I stand on that because my formative experiences were that whenever we were in trouble, we had allies with us. And I wanted the president to have someone more aligned with his views, so I needed to leave it.
What do you think the president got wrong about Syria?
Well, I think when you leave an administration over policy matters, and I laid that out in the letter when I noted the need for allies and all, I think you owe a period of silence afterwards. We have 1 million troops around the world who are trying to defend this experiment we call America. I don't believe that administration officials should leave the administration and then start creating controversy with comments outside when they owe a period of, I would call it a duty of silence long enough for the Secretary of State, the President, Secretary of Defense to protect the country.
If not controversy, maybe compliments. This is a book about leadership and a good book at that. What would you say is your favorite leadership quality of the sitting president?
Well, I think we started writing the book, Ben West, my co-author, and I, in 2013. We were on version 5 in 2017 when I was called to join the administration. And it's not a book about the sitting president, so I prefer to stay firmly focused on what good leadership is like. I'd led 40 sailors and Marines in an infantry platoon. I'd led 250,000 soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, Allied troops later. You learn a lot about yourself. You learn a lot about leadership when you go through that. And I wanted to pass this on.
When and why did you decide to include your time with the Trump administration into this book? Like you said, you've been writing this for 5 years.
Yeah. What I did, Maria Elena, was I put into the prologue why the book had been delayed for 2 years coming out, why it was coming out at this time. And my view is that government service is a privilege. It's also a duty. I was brought up that way. And when any president, Republican or Democrat, asks you to do something, as long as you're prepared to do it, you just roll up your sleeves and you work. You don't get into, wringing your hands and wondering about it. Just pitch in and do the best you can to help support the governance of the country.
The resignation letter is in that book, and it's been made public. Was it your decision to leave, or were you fired, or were you pushed into resigning, or pressured into resigning?
It was completely my decision to leave. I had, I believe, a good relationship with the president. I've read some of the stories that we didn't have a good relationship. It was very forthright. I would have time with the president weekly over lunch, private lunch, or in his office. The president knew everything I was doing, and I understood what the president wanted done. There just came a point where I thought he needed a different Secretary of Defense.
The president, the day before you resigned last December, the president on Twitter said, "We have won against ISIS." Secretary Pompeo was here a couple of weeks ago, and he said in some places now ISIS is more powerful than it was 3 or 4 years ago. What do you think has happened?
The challenge we face today is that terrorism is an ambient threat. It's simply out there. It's going to be there. On 9/11, we were reminded of that right here in this town when over 3,000 innocent people were murdered. I think Secretary Pompeo has it right, and I would leave to those who are in the administration now to speak to the threat.
Secretary of Homeland Security Secretary McAleenan had told Anthony Mason not long ago that the biggest threat internally is white extremism, white supremacist extremism. Would you say that there needs to be a reprioritizing of defense money toward that threat here at home?
I don't give policy advice from what I call the cheap seats outside. The people in those seats right now have that responsibility. However, I would agree that divisiveness inside this country is probably the biggest threat. The lack of respect, the lack of listening to one another and accepting that even people who disagree with us may be right once in a while.
Do you think this president can heal that divisiveness?
Well, I think that this is not about one person or one administration. This goes back a while, and it's time for at least the majority of us to roll up our sleeves and get to work. What's printed on the coin that every one of us had in our pocket, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. There are many areas where I think we have agreement. We're no longer talking about those. And we need to talk about common ground as much as we need to talk about where we disagree.
And when you talk about this internal divisiveness that is the biggest threat to our democracy, are you talking about Congress? Are you talking about the politicians being divided? Are you talking about the country being divided? What do you think is the biggest threat to our democracy?
Yeah, Maria Elena, I think it's all of those. I believe what has happened is when we run elections, it's always about dividing. I'm smart, you're not. I'm wise and you're dumb. It's not always pretty. It's not always civil. Well, welcome to democracy. Once an election's over, you go into governance. And it's not about divisiveness, it's about unity at that point. We no longer seem to go to governance. It's like we're in a constant election mode and constantly finding reason to cheer against each other instead of working together. In the military, you could not win on the battlefield. In a corporation, you could not win in the business place with that sort of divisiveness inside.
General Mattis, thank you so much for being with us this morning. Call Sign Chaos, Learning to Lead goes on sale tomorrow.
There's been a lot of talk about products made in the USA recently, and we thought this Labor Day weekend was the perfect time to check in on one entrepreneur's mission to bring back that label and at least some of those jobs. Our cover story is reported by John Blackstone.
Here we are in Middlesex, North Carolina, and this is a knitwear plant.
6 years ago, this apparel manufacturer in rural North Carolina was ready to close until Bayard Winthrop helped buy the company.
You know, we spent nationally much of the last 40 years moving manufacturing overseas to chase cheap labor and lower environmental standards and lower regulations.
In 1980, almost 80% of the clothing bought here was made in America. Today, it's around 3%. Winthrop says, well, globalization and trade deals made goods cheaper, They also brought decades of layoffs and plant closures.
Manufacturing plants are moving to where the workers are cheap.
We just can't compete with those prices.
I'm a free trade person, but I also am a believer in saying, wait a second, you cannot gut a bunch of communities in the U.S. and move to Bangladesh and then import all those goods back in and sell them at the local dollar store to all these people that now no longer have jobs.
Sound familiar?
We are living through the greatest jobs theft in the history of the world.
President Trump is by no means the first to campaign on bringing back manufacturing jobs.
There will be a giant sucking sound going south.
There will be no more NAFTA sellouts of American workers.
1.2 million new manufacturing jobs right here in America.
I think if they don't make a deal, it's going to be very bad for China.
President Trump's answer has been tariffs and trade wars. Back in 2012 in San Francisco, Bayard Winthrop set about bringing back manufacturing jobs the old-fashioned way by creating.
This is a heavier case.
Winthrop's previous experience had been on Wall Street and in Silicon Valley, but he started his own clothing company with a big name, American Giant, and an even bigger goal, making everything from start to finish in the United States. Like a few other clothing companies trying to manufacture in the U.S., there's a big challenge. All those closed factories have left a threadbare infrastructure for actually making apparel, like American Giant's flannel shirt. This was an art that had almost died in America.
Well, it had effectively died. I mean, you actually had to bring one of the great yarn dyers effectively out of retirement to come back and help deliver this program.
Creating work meant creating a supply chain involving multiple steps. We followed the chain for American Giant's hoodie and learned the jobs are not what they used to be. The seeds of Winthrop's big idea are found on farms like this one in Enfield, North Carolina, where cotton is planted in the spring.
Wallace, I need some asphalt this morning, right quickly.
Grower Jerry Hamill is looking for help, but says few are up to the job.
The labor force here, the ones that will work, are working, and some are not going to work. It makes no difference what they're offered, what kind of money, what kind of benefits. They just are not going to work.
So each season, Hamill hires men from Mexico on temporary worker visas. Come fall, they'll pick the cotton and transfer it to the local gin, which removes the seeds. The next stop is Parkdale Mills in Gaffney, South Carolina, where raw cotton is cleaned and spun into yarn. Parkdale Mills has more in common with Silicon Valley than it does with the mills seen in the 1979 movie, Mama Ray.
I think you better try to bring it up some if you can. I'll go as fast as I can. Yeah. They're watching me.
I come into your mill, I expect to see Sally Field, and I see robots instead.
You know, to stay in business today, you have to automate.
Andy Warlick is its CEO.
We couldn't survive competing against the world if we weren't automated. We probably have more robots here than we have employees, but the employees are well trained to operate those robots, and it's been the key to our survival.
In the 1960s, a mill like this would have employed 2,000 workers. Today, about 125 work here, producing about 2 million pounds of yarn a week. It's then knitted into fabric and sent a few miles away to Carolina Cotton Works, where it's dyed and dried.
What's happening is the wire on the rolls on the machine. There are a series of hook wire on the rolls.
Founder Paige Ashton and sons Hunter and Brian started working with Winthrop in 2013 after realizing he wasn't the typical client.
It contradicted the conventional thinking of taking cost out and offering something cheaper than everybody else. And on top of everything else, he's going to make it a couple hundred miles from here in North Carolina. My response was, this is the guy we've been dreaming about. Where has he been for the past 15 years?
For the final stop, the finished fabric goes to the knitwear plant Winthrop helped buy, Eagle Sportswear, where it's cut and sewn into actual clothing.
The sweatshirt is so complicated, there's so many parts that each modular line is only making a part of the sweatshirt.
To improve productivity, Winthrop replace the traditional assembly lines with groups of sewers working in teams. They get extra pay for exceeding daily quotas.
This is an example right here of a 3-woman modular sew line. There's a readout over here, which those numbers basically are telling you that our expectation for this team is 73 units at this point in the day. They're at 90. Their efficiency is at 123%.
You make more money?
Yeah, it's more money. I do.
Now, Aguilar has worked here 21 years. So you try to be very efficient all
Yeah,
day.
we try every day.
So I'm holding you up from keeping your meeting your goal.
Yeah.
You have to pay these people a good deal more than you would if they were sewing in China, Vietnam.
Yeah, I would sorry, that's a good thing, right?
Keeping this final step here in the U.S., Winthrop says, adds as much as $17 to the total cost of the hoodie. To reduce overhead, American Giant sells almost entirely online with only 2 stores. So the final price tag for the hoodie we followed from the cotton fields to the gin, to the mill, to the dyer, to the knitwear plant, to the store is no bargain, $108. Sweatshirt, it's $108.
Yeah.
You pay $108 for a sweatshirt?
What we really want to do with this particular item is make something that you are going to have for decades.
In this era of fast fashion, Winthrop may seem out of step, but despite its lofty price tag, his hoodie has been selling well ever since the digital magazine Slate called it the greatest hoodie ever made.
The article came out, and within 24 hours, we sold everything we'd ever made.
Byron Winthrop wants to inspire other companies to manufacture here. For him, the Made in USA label creates both jobs and pride. So are you selling an idea, an image, as much as clothing?
I think we're selling a value system. Stand for some things that matter, stand for American manufacturing, stand for the people that are making stuff. And when we buy things, when we do it consciously, when we do it with an eye towards understanding how these little votes that we make have an impact attached to them, we'll be better off.
With Labor Day now just a few hours away, we're about to watch a union power play at work. Leslie Stahl, 60 Minutes, takes us to the picket line.
That woman dancing around the picket line is Sarah Nelson, president of the Association of Flight Attendants. Don't be fooled by her playfulness. She's been called the most powerful labor leader in the country.
What is the labor movement waiting for?
Her steeliness came through in a speech she gave, the call to arms really, to the AFL-CIO in January in the midst of the government shutdown.
End this shutdown with a general strike!
The last time there was a general strike in the United States was 1946. In this case, Nelson was calling on all 12 million members of the AFL-CIO to walk out en masse.
We have real power as workers. If we decide not to participate in this economy, it stops. Everything stops.
But what you said came as a surprise to most people.
This was an extraordinary moment. 400,000 people are forced to come to work without pay. And the people that I represent are going to work in an increasingly unsafe condition. What is the labor movement waiting for?
By unsafe, she was referring to how the government shutdown was putting stress on airport screeners and others working without pay.
The layers of security that was put in place after 9/11, when the TSA was created, are not there. No one will get out of this unscathed if we do not stop this shutdown.
If it is unsafe, we will refuse to work those flights.
Can you do that?
We have that right. We have that right today.
Well, when you put it in the terms that you did and that you are right now, there's an implicit threat. You're going to shut down the whole economy.
Yes.
After her call for a strike,
there were a handful of air traffic controllers who said, I can't. I'm too stressed. I'm too tired. I can't medically do my job. And the plane stopped. And we said,
Do we have your attention now, Leader McConnell? And a few hours later, we had a resolution.
We have reached a deal to end the shutdown.
America's longest government shutdown came to an end, and Sarah Nelson became a hero. But she's fortunate. In one of the biggest strikes involving aviation workers, labor lost.
If you go back to PATCO, I don't know how old you were at PATCO.
Well, third grade.
You were in third grade and I was covering the White House.
Political observers feel that Mr. Reagan has been just plain lucky, drawing as his first bout with labor a clearly illegal walkout.
It was 1981 when PATCO, the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization, led a strike of its 11,000 members for better pay.
Our position has to be irreversible. There is a law and an oath that they sign.
So President Reagan fired them all. Since then, union membership has declined from 20% of all American workers to only 10%.
The PATCO strike had a devastating impact on the labor movement in 1981. Not just air traffic controllers who lost their jobs, but the whole labor movement was dispirited by it.
Professor Joe McCartan teaches labor history at Georgetown University. He says Sarah Nelson brings something new and inspiring to the union movement.
If you say union leader to most people, they still, I think, have in their mind the image of a cigar-chomping George Mimi.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And when you meet Sarah Nelson, she clearly doesn't fit that image.
You have quite a collection of airplanes.
Well, we represent flight attendants at 20 airlines.
She became a flight attendant 24 years ago when a college friend sold her on the idea. Once she started, she moved all over the country, flying out of Washington, Chicago, and Boston.
One of the planes that went into the 9/11 towers flew out of Boston.
Yes.
Could you have been on one of those planes?
I flew Flight 175 a week earlier, and I was friends with everyone on the plane. So this is Michael Turow and Amy King, and they were on Flight 175, and good friends. And I keep them next to me every day. We were taught up to that point that if there's a hijacker on board, that we are supposed to appease the hijacker, try to keep the hijacker calm, do what they say.
That was part of training.
That was part of training. That was in our handbook.
But the flight attendants on 9/11 didn't follow the handbook.
They fought back. They decided instantaneously to do that. And so our role changed even before we were told that it should change.
Almost everything about what it means to be a flight attendant has changed. It wasn't so long ago that stewardesses couldn't be more than 32 years old, had to be under a specific weight, and couldn't get married.
Sexism. This is a huge issue for people in your line of work.
Our profession was objectified and sexualized by airline marketing. This is what was sold.
You can find me morning, afternoon, or night. Just say when. I'm Judy, and I was born to fly. Fly me.
An ad like that today? Well, it's unthinkable. But Nelson says not all the changes in her industry have been for the better.
What are you saying about how crammed in we are now? If you're in a window seat and the seat in front of you is reclined backward, you can't get out.
Those seats have been shrinking. They've been getting closer together and smaller and packing more people in.
There are fewer attendants than there used to be.
The airlines are staffing at the federal minimums today. And prior to 9/11, they were staffing 25 and 50% over on a regular basis.
So let me get this straight. More people on each plane in a tighter configuration and fewer flight attendants.
More people, more responsibilities, and fewer flight attendants.
Which brings us to the Boeing 737 MAX jet that crashed in both Indonesia and Ethiopia, killing hundreds, and leading to the plane's grounding and to congressional hearings.
These accidents should never have happened.
Both hero pilots Sully Sullenberger and Sarah Nelson were called to testify.
I am here today because the public looks to flight attendants when it comes to aviation safety. the evidence was mounting and action was being taken around the world, we called for a grounding.
Does your union have the power to keep that plane?
Planes don't take off without pilots, but they also don't take off without flight attendants. If we believe that a condition is not safe, we're not going to fly it. Hey, listen, can you get your homework out?
When she's not calling for strikes or grounding airplanes, Sarah Nelson raises her rambunctious son, Jack, along with her husband, David. But union duties often intrude.
I have to make a call real quick to one of our negotiators, okay? The FAA administrator wants to meet with me now. Oh, it's about Boeing.
You're a working mother.
Yeah.
You have a big job, and you're like all the other working mothers around the country having to do that balance thing.
My son is 9 years old, so I often have to explain to him why I'm going to be gone, or why I might not be home before he goes to bed, or why I might have to leave before he wakes up in the morning.
I think you think about your job in very idealistic terms.
Think about it as my calling.
She certainly has a way of revving up her troops. At times, she's like a cheerleader. So what is this thing where you break into song? What is that?
You know, sometimes I can't help but sing. We go together like with a group of people, it's just the thing to bring everyone together.
Whoa.
So I'm a little out of practice.
You are no George Meany. That's all I can say. The age of George Meany is long gone. Now, as Professor McCartan says, American labor may be heading in a whole new direction.
I believe it's highly likely that the next leader of the AFL-CIO will be a woman.
Will it be Sarah?
Quite possibly. She's certainly put herself in the conversation.
Okay, big question. Becoming the head of the AFL-CIO, do you want that job?
I'm open to that, and I'm open to the idea that we can that we can really rebuild this labor movement.
Are you ready to stand up to management? Because they're going to do everything they can to keep the labor movement down.
Well, the rules in this country have been written for Wall Street, and it's going to stay that way until we force it to go the other way.
This land is your land.
People need to understand that this is our country, and this is our work, and we should be respected for it and paid for it.
Solidarity forever!
Yeah.